together. And so before I get started in the talk, I want to take a minute to say I am so glad you're here. You, in my opinion, are the most important person in this room, young lady, because you are our future. And I want you to know, that whatever created all of this created you because it wants to know itself as your life. That's how much you matter. You are amazing. Don't let anybody tell you anything different.
That's right.
Okay, now you can clap for her.
I'm going to switch this.
Okay. There we go. This one's being cranky. I'll use this one. Let's take a breath together. Vaughn, if you could turn the volume up on the handheld just a bit, that would help. So our talk title this morning, thank you, is Reality and Knowledge as Process. Notice it doesn't say as a process, because as Bohm is teaching us, that would fix it in a static thing. Right? It is process, which is continuous and ongoing. Bohm offers us a recall back to Heraclitus. Heraclitus, if you don't know who he was a philosopher that really upset the apple cart because everybody was busy fixing themselves in knowledge and making knowledge static. And Heraclitus comes along and says, no. Everything is connected to one thing, and that one thing is always moving. So knowledge can't be stagnant either. Thought can't be stagnant either. David Bohm offers us this beautiful process called Bohm dialogue, where you literally sit in silence until some inner voice, that inner voice that Jamie sang about this morning, compels itself so greatly you can't not speak. That requires us to navigate an internal battle with all of the things we want to say. When Jamie texted me last night that she was going to do this song, I was just like, how perfect. And just so you know, we plan some stuff, but for the most part, I leave her pre-talk selections and her selections between the synchronicity of the divine. And it works out quite amazingly. Because the whole thing today is about, are we willing to suspend what we know in order to know? And so if we will find ourselves with nothing to say, and let that be okay. But maybe it's just me. That's a challenging thing, right? Because I study, and I have all these degrees and initials behind my name that say I'm supposed to know something. You're counting on me to show up here on Sunday morning and say something, right? I mean, wouldn't it be an interesting day if I just said, okay, you know what I'm going to say, listen. And we just did that for 20 minutes. Wouldn't that be interesting? But that's exactly what Bohm dialogue does. Ernest Holmes says it to stay open at the top. D.E. Paul wrote an amazing book, I Don't Know, The Way of Knowing. Socrates is our main guy today. Because Socrates' statement that what I know, all I know, is that I know nothing, was perceived as a manipulative statement of ignorance. He died for saying that. He refused, just like Jesus, to defend himself. Right? Jesus could have avoided crucifixion had he simply defended himself. He didn't. Socrates could have avoided execution had he defended himself. Had he done what the powers that be wanted him to do, he wouldn't do it. Why not? Because clearly Socrates was anything but ignorant. Right? Did he know things? Of course he did. But what he was aware of is that there was more that he didn't know. That knowledge is fluid. Everything is always in motion. Isn't it interesting that our human ego thinks we've arrived somewhere? And how uncomfortable it is for us to shift to a new idea. Even in new thought, right? We struggle. We're a new thought philosophy. And yet we struggle to embrace new thoughts. I ain't judging, I'm just saying. And sometimes I'm judging. And usually it starts with the guy in the mirror, right? Because I frustrate myself. Because I want to know more. And it's not the human eye that's curious. See, I've noticed this pattern with human curiosity. It tends to be a solicitation to validate ourselves. We will be curious and we will ask just the right questions to get you to agree with us. Our courtrooms are filled with that. It's also filled with objections leading the witness. Sometimes it gets quashed and sometimes it doesn't. And we all do it in our primary relationships. We do it with our children as a method of teaching them. We will ask them rhetorical questions, hoping they get the obvious answer. But what if the brilliant young mind in the room knows a different answer that's more evolved than the one we think they should have? What if within you there is a new answer that you aren't even letting yourself be aware you have? Because there are. If knowledge is fluid, there's always something new to know. Right? I, for one, am really glad I know more today than the day I was born. I'm just saying. It would be a really interesting talk if I was up here in a suit knowing what I know as an infant. And yet, I invite you to consider that the infant knew more than you know now. Because the infant didn't have all the conditioning that is in the way of knowing what we get here knowing. We just didn't have the language skills to communicate it. Doesn't mean we didn't know it. See, we get boxed in by the language. We get boxed in by the restrictions, by what we call reality. Right? Our tendency toward reality is things we can touch. They're real. But are they? Are they? Ernest Holmes says this: in Living the Science of Mind, the basis or pure concept is that there is an absolute intelligence in the universe, one undivided, birthless, deathless, changeless reality. Since no one made God, and since God did not make itself, that which is, and is to be, will remain. Now that's pretty fluid. And that's exactly what Socrates in his dialect was creating. It's what Jesus was doing in the parables. They didn't answer anything directly. They asked more questions. That infant you is where your curiosity lives. Think back to when you were in the presence of an infant. They're like in awe of everything, and they're curious. They don't have any bells and whistles that make anything off limits. Perhaps we knew more then than we know now. Perhaps. And perhaps the way of knowing is to stop knowing. Perhaps the way we get smart is to stop being so smart. Perhaps it's understanding the difference between divine intelligence and human intellect. That my intellect makes me smart. My divine intelligence gives me wisdom if I'm willing to listen. The words to the song that Jamie gave us. I don't have words, and I don't need to be heard. I need to listen. What would it be like if we shifted our desire from wanting to be heard to wanting to hear? In Richer Living, Ernest Holmes, the 24, and actually that's happening every morning at 6 o'clock if you want to wake up and see your minister with bedhead. I'm live streaming my bedhead 365 days of Richer Living every morning. And this will come later because it's on page 124. To be effective, prayer must be affirmative. But it is not enough merely to affirm the presence of God. We must add to this realization the thought that divine intelligence is acting in and through us now, not later. It's not, nothing is coming to us. It's already here. If you do your treatment, if you do your prayer that your good is coming, I hope you know you're praying to practice patience. Because what you're telling the universe is to keep it coming. I'm not about it arriving. I'm about it being in transit. Perhaps claiming that it's already here might allow it to manifest for you. Perhaps. Prayer is not wishful thinking or wistful wishing, nor is it an escape from objective reality. I want to read that part again. Nor is it an escape from objective reality. Objective reality is the world we live in. Ernest Holmes, in 1953, is calling us to pay attention, to not do spiritual bypass. He never taught that we get to ignore planet Earth. Never. To be lost merely in our prayers might terminate in an unconscious desire to escape the activities of life. If you are engaging in spiritual bypass, here comes the solution. Ready? Stop it. I'd like to make it more complicated, but it's really not. Stop it. Therefore, we affirm that divine intelligence not only knows what to do, it impels us to act on its knowing. Now, if you can hear that and still think that science of mind charges you with avoiding everything that's happening in your society, we need to talk. Because he's saying right there, use spiritual principle in everyday activity. It's not a one or the other. It is a both and. And the same knowledge that you knew 10 years ago is not going to help you navigate society today. Evolution is always which direction? Forward. Nothing evolves backwards. Nothing. You got here in an infant body. You're grown now. You're not leaving in an infant body. Evolution is always forward. So perhaps Socrates, Heraclitus, David Bohm, Ernest Holmes, Jesus, Allah, Buddha, perhaps all of them are calling us to learn how to live in the moment, to actively participate in the moment, to actively practice the presence of infinite intelligence in the moment. And I was on a Centers for Spiritual Living, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion webinar yesterday. And we always manage to somehow get ourselves into the let's deny that we have any conversation about politics. And everything inside of me starts screaming. I hear Bishop Yvette Flunder, City of Refuge, Oakland, California, did a brilliant talk one day. And she talked, and she'd go, "Stop lying!" And I hear Bishop Flunder screaming in my head, "Stop lying!" Because politics is literally defined as policies that impact people. We have bylaws in this center. We have policies and procedures in this center. So for you to say, "Oh, we don't do politics," stop lying. We do. We just do the ones we like. We do the ones we wrote. And even then we struggle. Right? Because we write them because something inside of us told us we should, and then we don't want to follow them. We are at a huge opportunity right now. We are in, I know spring is coming, but we're already in election season. I know it's not on the calendar. It's like someday, right? It's not one of the days of the week, but here we are. What I am going to ask you to do is vote from consciousness. Not for consciousness, from consciousness. Allow yourself when you're considering your vote, to do so in alignment with the spiritual principles that you live by. To do so from a perspective of wholeness. To do so just like you would, hopefully, in your marriage, that how you do things is going to impact your spouse. And so how I vote is going to impact you. I encourage us all to look at policies, to prayerfully consider impact, to vote from consciousness that as closely as possible, because if you find somebody that 100% aligns with spiritual principle, please introduce me, including myself. I fall off the balance beam from time to time. Vote based on spiritual principle. Vote based from that. Because when we start practicing the presence, when we start living our teachings, we can't help but create a world that works. Because spirit is always going to be in alignment with spirit. And everything unlike that must bubble to the top to be resolved. So buckle up, because the more we act and live in alignment with spiritual principle, the more things that are going to come up that have to be moved out of the way, and it just might get a little bumpy. Might get a little bumpier. Are you up for the ride? And you're the only one that can decide that. My job is to rattle your knowledge a little bit. To open you to it's not even my job to make you think, because I can't. But what I can do is give you something to ponder. What you can't do is unhear anything I said. And you showed up, so you're participating. I want to wrap up with the thing that we're reading, because it continues to be true. That the world needs, what the world needs is spiritual conviction, followed by spiritual experience. I would rather see a student of this science prove its principles than to have them repeat all the words of wisdom that have ever been uttered. It is far easier to teach the truth than to practice it. So don't be surprised if you struggle to practice it. Okay? But the practice of truth is personal to each, and in the long run, no one can live our life for us. To each is given what they need, and the gifts of heaven come to all alike. How shall we use these gifts is all that matters. To hold one's thought steadfastly to the constructive, to that which endures, and to the truth may not be easy in the rapidly changing world. But to the one who makes the attempt, much is guaranteed. The essence of spiritual mind healing and of all true religious philosophy is an inner realization of the presence and perfection within and around about. It is the hope of heaven, the voice of God proclaiming, I am that which thou art. Thou art that which I am. There is no separation. You are infinite intelligence in form. You don't have to look for it. You just have to get quiet enough to hear it. It is always talking to you. Always. I love you.